Welcome, everyone. This is Deep Dive into Nature of Sound. I'm your host, Hassan Sabbagh, and I have here Dr. Joyce Mikal-Flynn from Metahab.
Hello, and
It's a
thanks for
pleasure to have
having me. Yeah.
it's a pleasure to have you here. So I just wanted to start off with just talking about a little bit about our organizations and what Nature of Sound is doing for supporting survivors and the program that Metahab has established. So I just wanted to take a moment for Joyce, if you mind just going into a little bit about Metahab.
So great. So thank you. And also thank you for having me. So Metahab is actually it's two words put into one. So when people go through challenges or adversities or have an injury or whatever, we typically think about them rehabilitating or rehabbing. Well, I got into this because of, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, an event that occurred with me that in the aftermath of that event, I was just very, very frustrated over people talking about things that I couldn't do anymore and, you know, kind of really painting with a pretty broad brush the negative parts of it. When I was moving through my recovery or rehab process, I started to learn again that not only could I do more than people thought, I needed to push myself. And I already was a nurse practitioner. And I remember talking to the docs who were taking care of me about, not giving me some hope around that. So many years have passed since my initial event. But I remember kicking around this idea with some friends about, people go through really tough stuff, really significant events. And not only do they survive, but they actually thrive. And not in spite of what happened, but as a direct result. So I started thinking, I don't like the word rehab because it only suggests that you go back to baseline. People blow past that all the time. So I go, I want to make up a new word. So with some friends, colleagues, we made up the word meta, going above and beyond, habilitation, restoration. So Metahab is first a word, then it's a philosophy of utilizing life events to move further, to grow, to become more resilient. And then I put together a system by which one can accomplish that. So the word Metahab is, like I said, a word, a philosophy, and basically a clinical pathway. The business of Metahab houses all of that.
And it's really exciting to kind of hear you break it down, because when I first heard about post-traumatic growth, right, and just seeing how your platform kind of exemplifies that as the foundation and just the
Mhm.
focus on overcoming traumas, it really kind
Mhm.
of opened my eyes into the ways that we can create those genuine conversations within ourselves and how we can kind of help others achieve what you said, like going beyond the baseline.
Right, right, yeah. And I have to say you're one of my best students in that because it seemed like also you were really ready to hear a message like that. I
Yeah,
think there are
absolutely.
different times in people's process that they're really ready to hear something that encourages personal strength, builds an awareness of what you have, and then leads you toward, hey, actually, I am in a weird way better, stronger, more resilient, precisely because of how I engaged with what happened to me.
And one of the key things that I took away from your program, and I just want to say how grateful I was to being able to participate and to be the first male to go through the program. That was a big honor. I was so privileged and welcomed by everyone in the program, because at first I wanted to bring this program to help other survivors. So I didn't really foresee myself participating in the way that I did.
Mhm.
But then I did, and it was really kind of life-changing, because I've always looked at how many barriers exist in having a conversation that's related to our trauma. And when we look at different forms of trauma, those barriers make it really hard to relate to others. Especially with survivors of exploitation, survivors of domestic violence, just general injury and trauma. And really, I saw that all coalesce between the question of why. Like, why
Mhm.
did this happen? And I felt that your program really hit on that, because it not only addresses the why, but it also addresses the yes. And I know you love the phrase that I always said
I
that this
do. I
program
do.
is all about saying yes to life and being able
Right.
to turn your adversity, turn your pain and your trauma
Mhm.
into a strength.
Mhm.
And that was really important to me, because
Yeah.
I was able to exemplify that, I feel, in my journey.
And yes, so that's why you're one of my favorite students, because you actually like how you really brought that in and applied it to yourself. And one of the things that I want to make mention of is when you looked at, I would have to say, one of the things that I've seen as I've worked with a variety of survivors. So I've worked with not only survivors who you specifically work with, but even people who've gone through cancer, spinal cord injuries, veterans, or whatever. One of the things that I have found, though, is that trauma is a shared experience. We might have different types, but what people endure, what they go through, what they face, how they meaningfully engage with it, there's some pretty similar things between different traumas. The notion, too, that you talked about it, about the why, I think there's sometimes never a really good answer to the why. But one of the things that you brought out, and one of the stages of Metahab, is actually the second stage of Metahab, and that is saying yes to life. So you go in there and you say, I don't even know how I'm going to get through this. I don't know what's going to happen, but I am going to say yes to a life that's out there, and I'm going to really engage with that. And so it's not so much why do people do things, but I really like to focus on how did they do it? How did they take themselves from here to here? And people do it all the time. I didn't make up the idea that people go through really bad things and not only survive but thrive. It's happened forever. We wouldn't be here as a species if that didn't happen forever. So it's already been there. All I did was give some language and a structure to a process that we do all the time.
I was gonna wait for that to. Yeah, you really kind of. Let me just ground myself here. The little wind chimes got me.
Oh, sorry. My husband is super into clocks, so we have dinging times all over the place.
But you mentioned the stages and going through the process of how. I really feel like that was the scientific observation and approach that you took to this, and the necessary tools that we're able to equip ourselves as a survivor, and as we navigate, our traumas and the hurdles of life and what's next. Could you go into a little bit of the stages of Metahab and some of the observations that you're able to use?
Yeah. And I appreciate that, because when you get into the stages of MetaHab, it really gets into the how to. What do you do first? Then what do you do next, and whatever. And let me just reiterate that this is all based on really solid behavioral science, brain science, genetics, and epigenetics. There's really sound science behind all of this. But one of the things that, as you go through, you have to really start to engage. When I said you need to engage, so it's good to have a process. Where do you start? So after interviewing many, many, many survivors, They basically told me how they did it. And I separated it out into these stages. So, stage one is what I call the acute stage. That's when people are just coming out being very rattled from whether it's a challenge, adversity, or even a trauma. That's when things, kind of the starting point. And then when you look at the second, and at that time, I just want to back up too. When at that time, I always tell people, don't look too far ahead. Let's just get from day to day to day. And then you can start thinking about things in the future. But right now, it's very much just getting through the day. Then they get to a point in stage two, and that's what you talk about a lot, is the stage two where they make a critical decision. They may not even understand completely how they're going to do it, but they make that decision to, as you talk about, take on a future, take on life. I call that the turning point. Once that decision is made, that's a very powerful decision. And when you talk to different people who have been through things, I bet you when you listen to their experience, you'll hear it or they'll be able to tell you this was the point in time when I said yes to life. You'll be able to say that. Once that decision is made, then there's a lot of activity that goes on. So there's a lot of things that happen in terms of, what I call traditional and complementary, not only medicine, but interventions in therapy. So people in your family, friends, therapists, whatever, very engaged, very helpful in pulling things together and suggesting different things that can be helpful to you. And that's a very, very busy, busy time for you. So then you go to stage four, which is adaptation and acceptance. And it's kind of just for now. You don't have to, you don't have to stay there forever, but you've been through a very, very busy, busy stage. And at some point you have to just take a breather. What did this mean? Finding some of the meaning in the suffering you went through? What was this pain about? How did I take this on? What do I know now I didn't know before? Really become an existential, almost spiritual part of it. And once you start to understand, again, the stage three is doing stuff. So you know that taking control and making good choices really bring forth your ability to move forward. You understand that more in stage four. Stage five, getting back into life. You have to get back into life. Many times it won't be the same way that you left it. I talk to a lot of people that some doors closed, and yet here this very interesting other door opened up. And they never would have even considered that had they not gone through this other. Life is not the same. Life is not going to be the same. But over time and with your work, it can be better. And the sixth stage is Metahab. That's really taking on the future. That's when you've really adopted this mindset and you use it even with small annoyances that you go through the stages very quick. Like you get annoyed and then you go, I'm going to do something about this. And, it could be like a parking ticket. You get annoyed with that. And then you go, okay, I'm annoyed. Now I'm going to make a decision to do something. Now I'm going to go pay the ticket. Now I'm going to learn my fourth stage, think about that, not do that, not park there again. And fifth stage, you get back into life and just move. And so it's really fun to see how people adopt this, not only frame of mind, but system in their head that they go, okay, this is how I work the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like how you use the parking ticket as, an example of how quick you can go through the Metahab, because I think, with everyone's individual experiences and traumas, you're right. Like sometimes something happens and you may not ever be able to go back to that life. And the stages are I feel when you work in this field of like working with survivors, right? It's very evident
Mhm,
that there is this identification, right? The you acknowledge your circumstance or situation.
mhm,
And the
mhm,
second stage is, you know, the turning point. You start
mhm,
to finally see a, like, let's say, a way out. And the third
mhm,
point is to do those steps. And the fourth is when you finally have that control. And the fifth is really where you exemplify the whole process, right? And you're
mhm.
able to, you know, see the, you know, the fruits of your labor, right?
Mhm. Right, 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 right. And you get back into things. And, I talk about this a lot. I've seen it, on a creative basis as well, where one of the um, metaphors or a model that I use is like with Picasso's paintings and cubism. And if you've ever seen a Picasso cubism painting, it's you can look at it and you can recognize some of the items in the painting, but they're really put together in a different way. And I always say that's kind of like what happens with people, where life kind of falls apart. You become dismantled. But what you do is take control and make choices. You get to pick up those pieces and put that in that frame the way you want it to be put in the frame. And it's not the same because you're not, this has to be so clear. You are not the same. There are parts of you that come forward that you'll recognize as being very important parts of your life, but there are many things that are going to change. And so you can pick up those pieces and put them in that frame, and you can look at this and go, yeah, I see myself, but in a different way, a more unique way. You're much more interesting. You're much more, hmm, this is how I like my life to look like now. And it's very powerful when you kind of start to think at that level.
I feel like that's where we start to live authentically, right? Where we acknowledge the circumstances that we can't control, but then
Mhm,
we're able to look at what we can control. And one of the things that is how we perceive ourselves and
mhm,
our wants and needs for our life. And I know how you
mhm,
mentioned the frame was because that's when
mhm,
we start to paint our life
mhm.
together in the ways that we have envisioned. And I feel like that gives survivors a lot of control because then they're able to start putting those pieces together so that they can, you know, live as authentically as they wish. And that's a huge barrier.
That is such a great observation, insight, and a great word because you know, now that I think back on when people have told me their experiences, so much of the outcome is this notion of, I see some things now I didn't understand before. I I I show up for life in a way that I didn't before. It's way, like you're right, it's so much more authentic because the focus is not on what do you have, like in terms of material things, although they're fun and material things are fun, but people really do focus more on relationships. Those are very important. They understand the importance of them as they went through their situation. Their spiritual life becomes more robust in that way. They become more open to opportunities. They become a little gutsier, a little bit more. They take calculated risks a little bit more because, after all, they realize, this could have happened, but I have a life and I'm going to do something with it. It's just, the conversations I have with people who have been through significant things and who have come back way more interesting, way more, like you said, authentic around that. So, such a great word. So, thanks for bringing that out. That was great.
Yeah, of course. And It just feels like it allows you to be more present, because when you're chained to this pain of your past and the trauma that you've endured and survived, we sometimes don't acknowledge that achievement that we survived. And it was just such a, like, one of the biggest things, I know I mentioned it earlier, is just the barrier between traumas. And normally you wouldn't want to sit a survivor of exploitation with a survivor of domestic violence, because when it comes to sharing the story and talking
Mhm.
about it, the others
Mhm.
are not going to understand the levels that you experience, since usually those support groups, right, are usually designed to get people with those same circumstances that they couldn't control, so that there's that level of understanding. But with Metahab, we didn't really talk about our individual traumas. It was always about observing the process, like the tools that were used. And you're able to
Mhm.
use it. It's like almost like art, because everyone can look and see art and hear music and interpret it in their own way. And that's what's so beautiful about it, is that we're all able to see what we need or want to see. And I feel like that's
Mhm.
what Metahab does.
Mhm. And that's such a great point too, because when we do MetaHab programming, the focus is not on the event. The focus is on you. The focus is on discovery. The focus is on unearth strengths and things. The focus is acknowledging. The focus is on discovery of what's in you. And so that's why it works with a variety of people, because the focus is not on, oh, we all went through cancer, or we all went through that. You can have multiple people with, and I have had programs where I have nobody with the same situation, but they come to this beautiful conversation about what they chose to do after, what worked, how they did this, what they see now. And it's so powerful. And I actually am going to, a friend of mine was, had read my book recently, and she said, I was just reading it, in one of the parts of the book. So if you'll allow me to share this one paragraph, this person read the book in advance and wrote something about it. And she said, this is really why I think this works. And it was he was a therapist, Joe Sikora, and he wrote about, understandably, you probably spend a great deal of effort trying to avoid pain, struggle, and trauma. It makes sense. Unfortunately, no matter your best efforts, you won't be successful. Trauma and tragedy will strike, but it doesn't have to define you. In fact, and talks about my book, I explain how trauma can be your greatest teacher, leading you toward a life of purpose and meaning. So let this book help you discover that. And when she said that to me, I'd forgotten that he wrote that. And I went back there and I went, that's really what this is about. This is not about what happened to you. That is that's the starting point. But it's a launching off point. But as I talk to people, I go, I want us to focus not so much on what these situations did to us, but what they can and do for us. And that is never to minimize the pain, the trauma that you've been through. I never, talk about I never minimize that. That scar is there, and it will be there. And sometimes you go back to that, and there's an emotional part to it. But the thing is, when you prepare yourself and you get into this healing process, you recognize that just as a scar on our skin is always there, that tissue is actually stronger than the surrounding tissue. So if if it's healed, you've taken care of it, you'll always see it. But actually, because of the healing process, that tissue is stronger than what's around it. It's harder to break again, harder to break open. And that to me is a universal mindset or universal humanitarian idea around what we can discover not only within ourselves but help us discover that within each other then.
And it really symbolizes resilience and just our empowerment, right? And I think that's really where I kind of want to hone in on our collaboration, which is all about empowering survivors and focusing on that resilience. And, when I went through the program, I immediately identified how that collaboration would be beneficial to survivors because once you give them the tool sets to achieve, self actualization, which is the goal in stage 6, right? You're able to see the future. And of course, we don't expect all survivors to be able to carry the torch and to advocate and to fight for others. But it gives people that ability to say, okay, I now am in a position to think creatively or to think objectively about what happened in my circumstances and ways to, help others. Do you just to kind of talk about your perception of our collaboration? Where do you see that in the survivor's journey?
Well, that's definitely something. We talk about stage one, and you see, you don't talk. Nature of sound is like further down the line when people have been able to figure some things out. But again, I just want to point out that it's more than stage 6. I like it to be more like Albert Bandera's self-efficacy, where people understand this real personal strength in them and they go, wow. And it's weird. I never would have noticed this about myself had I not been through that. But you are precisely right. When people start moving in this very strength based, creative way where they just start going, then all of a sudden they start thinking, well, what about this? Well, what about that? What about that? Because, like I said, they become better at calculated risks. They feel more comfortable with themselves. They recognize that, hey, this was bad. Don't want to go back to that, but I got through it and this is what I can do. And so, like I said, some of these other new doors start opening up for them. And had they not gone through this other stuff, they might not seen it. So I absolutely love what you do because again, it's a little bit of an overused word, but it's a great word. So it is the empowerment. It is the first understanding within yourself, your capacity, your abilities, what these terrible events drew out of you in terms of, as you said, building your resilience, recognizing your strengths, creating off of the internal capacity you have already to say, wow, why would I hold myself back on that? Or, I learned this. Now I really want to learn that. And they go for it. They go for it. And it's so great. But you must first understand within yourself that once you get that in yourself, you surround yourself with the right people, you listen to the right messages, you pay attention to what you're hearing and how to do things. You don't spend a lot of time complaining. You go, no, 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 I don't have time to do that. I got to get stuff done. And so, what you are providing to people is just that. It's this beautiful platform to recognize not only, again, what this did to you, but what it can do, do for your growth, your capacity, what you can do, and putting you around other people and hearing their stories and go, oh, wow, yeah, look at, maybe I could. This is what I can do. This is a strategy I can take on. So I just love it. But it's definitely one of the things that, that's in the process, but further on in the process. Not to say that you can't mention it to people early on, but you really gently work with them, and then when they get to this insight, super powerful.
Absolutely. And I think, hitting on that gradual introduction is really important because obviously we don't want to overwhelm them. And with Nature of Sound, just to clarify for our viewers, we like to provide a creative community solutions platform. And what that really means is it's social entrepreneurship. We like to give resources and the tools to make the difference in our community that we envision. And really, when we work with survivors, it's all about empowering them as leaders or not. Sometimes leadership isn't for everybody, but at least it's a journey that we can collectively hold that torch, carry that mantle, and to make the necessary steps for change that we all know that needs to happen. And we focus primarily on, you know, making genuine conversations, something like deep dive, what we're doing right now, looking at
Mhm.
how we can bridge misconceptions, misconceptions with exploitation, the journey of being a survivor, and really hitting on the humanity of it. What can
Mhm.
we do as a society? And I really love the fact that with Metahab and having those tools, it really helps for survivors to just jump into it with that fire, that burning desire to do more. And
Mhm.
that's where I really found this collaboration to be so important because not
Mhm.
only are we helping survivors get access to these essential tools that you're able to provide, but we're also giving them the opportunity to do something greater and to give them the resources that they might not have otherwise known they had. And I know for our
Mhm.
community in Solano County, there's just not a lot of resources. It's a really difficult, and we were very lucky to when we were able to bring Metahab down to collaborate
Mhm.
with some survivors here. We had to
Mhm.
go through our own efforts, and we were able to get
Mhm.
our own grant funding to give a baseline of services. So this is like access to shelter and access to rehab and mental health services and just basic goods like food and clothing.
Mhm.
And I know one thing we always talk about, and I don't think we mentioned it here, is that Metahab is not a replacement for therapy, right? It's something that goes with it because, like we mentioned earlier, Metahab's programming doesn't focus on your individual trauma. It's about those observations about others and how they went through some of the process. And I just wanted to give you a chance, Joyce, to talk about your own journey. I know you mentioned that you'd get into it later, but you kind of talked about how not being able to continue life the same, and I feel like your story has really exemplified that message. You were able to identify the things that you needed in your life, and you're able to make those goals and those steps that that turnaround and make that a reality for you. Would you mind going into it?
Yeah, but before I do that, I just wanted to say, give you kudos again about some of the comments you made, because I'm glad that you did say this. I am not a therapist. This is not therapy. This is a program that is like what we call a psychoeducational program, right? It brings people to this awareness of what's going on and a strategy of how to move through. So I really appreciate that. The other thing, when you were talking about the creative solution, the platform, I don't think sometimes how like radically you are like shaking things up for people to get in there and say, this is what survivors can do. This is what survivors look like. Sometimes we look at survivors in this other way of, they're kind of downtrodden and that, which they are, but there's also, look at you, you're a survivor, and it's really important. And finally, having what you do, I am telling you, when people find a purpose, when people find a purpose, that is when they really take off too. So when you're finding things in the community, so and just very cliff note kind of way. So over 30 years ago, when I was very young, and I had my husband and I have three children. At that time our children were 2 years old, 8 years old, and 9 years old. I'm a very active person, marathon runner, triathlete, doing lots of things, very busy mother of three, working part time, and our children were on a swim team. And there was a championship swim meet over the weekend. So I don't remember any of this. I kind of remember going out to dinner with some people on Friday night, but that's about it for a month. But apparently, what I've been told is on Sunday, there was a fun adult relay. Well, for me, nothing's like really fun. Everything's competition, right? Everything gets really competitive. So I grabbed my husband, a couple of friends, and said, "Come on, we're going to swim this and we're going to win this. And I'm going to swim the last leg of the relay because I'm the fastest." So I did just that. And I happened to finish on the side of the pool that's 13 feet deep. And for whatever reason, there's some cardiac issues that came about, which have never returned, but I had something go on. And I just sunk to the bottom of the 13-foot pool. My husband and people realized I wasn't surfacing. He dove in, got me to the side. Luckily, since there were a lot of children there were a lot of parents there, and there was an ER doc. One of them is that parents was an emergency room physician, a cardiac nurse specialist, and respiratory. So there were physicians there, and I got really, really good CPR at poolside. So they gave me CPR for over 20 minutes before they got a pulse going again. Then they landed a helicopter close to the event, and I was life flighted to University of California Davis emergency, and my heart stopped again in the helicopter, and they got it going. And that's when, at 35 years old, doing everything right, didn't smoke, didn't drink, really focused on my family, all this kind of stuff, my life changed. It just changed. And at that time, I was already a nurse practitioner. So I was used to working with people. But one of the things that frustrated me the very most was how, like I said, when I would ask doctors, well, when will I run again? Oh, you're never going to run again. Well, when will I swim again? Oh, you're never going to do that. Well, when? And I was always being told no. And things were painted so dismally, and I had pretty extensive cognitive delays secondary to the extended CPR. And I knew I was not right. I didn't even recognize my husband at first. I didn't recognize my children. Like I knew them, but I just didn't know how. So things were pretty tough. But what made it even tougher was just this, like I said, this idea of things are going to get better, or well, here's what you can do to do things. So obviously I did get some help. My husband found a cardiologist who is a runner, and he got me into cardiac rehab, and I got some, I went to speech therapy, and I did a lot of stuff. I did stage 3. But I just, after coming out of that, I decided to really get my brain back. I was going to go back to school. So I went back to get my master's, and I started studying people who had survived a death event. And I wanted to know if they'd gone through the same thing I had, like the depression and the grief and all this kind of stuff. And turns out, yes, they have. But it's completely not addressed. I mean, nobody addresses it. No, nobody says, okay, things are going to be tough for you for a while. But here are some things, here's a strategy that you can do. You need to, it's helpful to, you don't need to do anything, but it is helpful to do this, and it's helpful to do that, and it's helpful. So it really changed the trajectory of my work, not only as a clinician, but actually as a researcher, because I was just absolutely fascinated then with this idea of people going through really significant things, like I said. And not only did they survive, but they thrived. And not in spite of what happened, but as a direct result. And that got me into my doctoral work, which, I'd already identified the term Metahab, and my doctoral work really helped me clarify the concept, as well as clarify a system that brought in the stages and some other things we use to bring that forth. But I got to tell you, it's not been easy. I've been at this for over 20 years. I've been studying it, writing about it, written books about it, or whatever. And I would say it hasn't really been since the last 5 or 6 years where people really, reach into that. Like, this is like, oh my gosh, we have to study resilience. I go, yes. Like, why is this new to you people? What is so new about all this? Or it's like this new idea. Like, I tell people, I go, I did not make up the idea that people go through bad stuff and get better. They've done it forever. But all of a sudden it's like this new, oh, we need to do wellness stuff, and we need to do it mindfully, and we need to go, yes, I have been telling you that for 25 years. So that to me is, but anyway, so
Okay.
that's the kind of thing that I've been through. And I will tell you, and I'm like gutsier about saying this now, but it has never been an issue with survivors. They get it. Every time I talk to a group of people who have been challenged, been through different adversities, been through something like that, this is nothing like they actually go, "Oh my gosh, somebody's finally talking about it with this kind of language." I think it's the same thing where you talk about, the nature of sound, this creative solution. We're not just, bombarding on what's wrong. We're taking this radical approach to things and saying, we get things are bad. We know what's wrong. Our focus has to be on these solutions and these very creative solutions. And in a weird way, it is precisely because of going through these challenges and adversities, it has opened up, this creative part of us that we may not have recognized had we not gone through that other tough stuff.
Yeah, and I one thing I was able to identify really is that we both kind of created something that we ourselves needed. Like you were talking about how there was no, this is like this well-kept secret that,
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
overcome trauma and become stronger, right? And with Nature of Sound, it was always, at least to me, about empowering the voices of the voiceless, being able to look at our shared humanity and think of creative ways to make a difference. And that's why when, it's a platform for anyone to participate in, and for those who are certainly passionate about certain social issues, we allow
mhm,
ourselves to be dynamic so we can work towards those things. But for me, my journey and my fight has always been exploitation. So that's where,
mhm,
the platform has been, focused primarily because of my leadership. I've always wanted to
mhm,
make sure that we're able to address the things that I needed to address. And
mhm,
when I first started with this journey, I wanted to use music as a way to bridge people together, because when we listen to music, it's one of the few things that can get everybody together. They may not like the same genre of music, but
right,
in a generality, music brings us together. And that
right,
was kind of my mindset. Okay, like let's look at these. Back then, it was a very taboo topic to talk about human trafficking and exploitation. And I wanted to, let's say, bring advocates and survivors to talk about the issue and bring it
mhm,
forthwith to the youth, right? Just we would
mhm,
host concerts, so it was youth led, and then we would have an advocate and a survivor just talk about this issue that affects them, right? Human trafficking affects everybody. It can affect your loved ones, your children, yourself. Nobody is, able to be free from this
yeah,
epidemic. And that was where it was so concerning to me because no one was talking about it. And I'm just sitting here going, wow, our journey was obviously incredibly different. No journey is the same. But just seeing how we were able to build something that we ourselves needed, it's really
mhm,
empowering because the endurance, the the resilience that you show in your story. I know definitely Cliff Notes version of it, and I recommend all our viewers to just, if you're interested in Dr. Joyce's story, to just go to metahab.com, pick up her book. She even has the workbook for Metahab on there. It's really
Mhm.
empowering stuff. So I just wanted to just throw that little throw that little shout out for you in there.
Awesome. Well, and I love it too because one of the things I love how you go, coming up with this crazy idea that you can go through tough stuff. And I love that. And I remember when I was putting all this together, our son, who's now in his 30s, but I was talking to him about he's in a very creative world. He's in filmmaking and very creative stuff. And I was talking to him about my Metahab idea and the system. And I said, and his name is Keenan. And I said, hey, Keenan, I don't know. Maybe it's too simple. It's pretty simple, how you go, the stages and how you move forward and all that. And he said, I love this. He goes, Mom, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not worthy. It just means you got to the essence of it. And I think your work with Nature of Sound is getting to the essence of it, where people, when you talk about leadership too, I taught leadership classes at Sac State. And I think it's so fundamentally important to first realize we are leaders of ourselves. And when I would teach leadership, I would say, this is an inside job. Good leaders know themselves. Good leaders spend time figuring stuff out on themselves. They get the right people around them. They do all that. So the same thing with this. When you're going through something, it is an inside job. And once you have detected it, once you have become aware and seen it, it just opens up so many things for you, like you said, to be creative, to be more brave, to be braver, to do some things that are so purposeful. I know from the conversations you and I've had that this never leaves me. I wake up in the morning and I think about it. I think about and so I'm sure with the work you've done, and I like how it's transformed too. When you started doing this and then it moved into this, that's how, one thing leads to another. And now I know this. So now I want to take it to this level. And now I want to take it to that level. And that's when you really see that's the creative part of it. That's so powerful. So, yes, this is something that I just, I'm getting ready to like, well, when should I retire? And I'm like, I don't know if I could really retire from this because number one, I really enjoy it. I learned so much from working with individuals who have been supremely challenged in some cases. And the other part of it is that it feeds me. So when I work with people, I like that I can give something, but I always say, but look what you gave me. Look what I got now. I see things about you. I can understand yeah, the perceptions that are changed as a result of hearing people's experience. Really something.
It really is. And I just wanted to say how thankful I am for your mentorship and guidance through the program, and just allowing me that honor to be the first male participant in the Metahab program. I really couldn't have done that program in a more important time or stage in my life. There was a lot of adversity I was facing, and, a lot of resurfacing trauma. And it really was a pivotal moment for me, because I don't think I think that was a moment where I was best prepared to make that turning point. And I'm incredibly grateful and appreciative of all the work that you've done in this program. And I'm just so excited to be able to partner with you, to have this
Yes.
conversation, and even doing a conference with you, right? So just
Well, that's what
if
I
you
was
would,
going to say. Talk about that partnership. Let's
yeah,
talk about, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, do you mind with the date and just a kind of a shout out for our audience that those in the
Oh,
Sacramento
yeah, for
area?
sure. And I'll give you the link that people can see too. But again, to your, this is how much I respect what you're doing. And you are right. If with this group of survivors, have been the only male. And it was so funny when Elizabeth Brim and I are the one, we're putting this together. And Elizabeth called me and she said, "Hey, Dr. George, this male wants to be part." And I was like, I don't know about that. And so we said, okay, well, instead of saying no, let's explore this. And so one of the things that we did was we asked the other women in the group for, would that be okay with them? And they said, resounding, absolutely. And so not only were you an amazing part of the group, but like you said, it's so funny how, life works out. The timing was perfect. And since that time, you and I have had many conversations about things. You attended the post traumatic growth conference at Sac State last year. That was so successful. We're having an advanced one this year, and I've asked you to be on my survivor panel. And I'm so glad you said yes. And we are actually using that theme for the panel, saying yes to life. So there's so much. See, talking about being creative, so much that you brought forward. So, yes, on saying yes to life on April the 20th at Sacramento State University in the Alumni Center, we are having our second post traumatic growth day workshops conference, and it is entitled Spotlight on Mental Wellness, and we are going to focus on mental fitness. So we will bring in the subtitle is the art and science of building resilience and post-traumatic growth. But this is such a great conversation. This is such a great conversation. Yeah, you know what actually would be really cool too to think about, and I'll ask him since you're going to be when it's, we're having a health fair after. You should have a booth for Nature Sound.
Okay. Just let me know who I need to contact. And just to talk about the frame. So we've been trying to change things up. So that's what took
Mm-hmm.
me a minute when we got started is so we're
Mm-hmm.
recording what you see. We're also
Mm-hmm.
recording the individual audio and your individual camera. So if
Okay.
anything looks weird or anything like that, we're going to be able to fix it.
Okay, thank God, because
Yeah.
I'm kind of trying to look at you and look at this and look at all this, and so because I can see that I'm making movements, and there's just a little delay with that. So, but this is such a great. I just, you are so right. The timing for you to do that was so on point because like you have just been a sponge in terms of you know what I mean? Absorbing this kind of content. It's just fantastic.
I think I was
Fantastic.
really ready to hear it, and it just so happened that I was already on my journey with kind of trying to overcome my trauma. I was taking some therapy and stuff like that, but the therapy I didn't. I mean, it made me kind of acknowledge or understand what I was going through, but this really like launched me into like finding the I already had that purpose, but to find the grace of that purpose, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that and I think I love how I'm actually taking notes because I'm going to bring this through to when we do the conference. And I do think I love your idea too, which you talk about like you were ready to hear it. You're ready to hear it. And I think that's kind of something I'm going to, think about writing about a little bit about that readiness and, kind of, taking the other role. You're the interviewer, but taking the other role. I'm going to ask you, what do you think What have you observed? What did you observe that made you ready to hear this?
That's a really good question. I think I noticed a lot of resurfacing trauma, really, and there was a lot of circumstances that were happening in my life that made me realize that the trauma I thought I handled was not really handled. And that really comes with that unfortunate, like the toxic masculinity mindset. I'm not saying that I was toxic, but just the kind of like men need to just get over it, move on. And there wasn't really a lot of mental health when I was in high school when it would have affected me the best. A lot of what happened to me happened as a child, but I also had trauma going into young adulthood. So it was just kind of a compound of a lot of different various things. And it kind of was like, it felt to me that the trauma that affected me just ended up being like a river and just constantly just flowing, and I was
Mhm.
trying to be this bridge, just trying to go over the river. And I noticed that it started to just kind of overwhelm me. And that's when I ironically just was in the, just the universe aligned, and I was able to just participate in Metahab during that time. So it was a really opportune moment for me because I just needed to hear it.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that part of it. And I think again, this sense, this is also a progression for me. I'm always learning from people like you just saying that. Hold on one second. Yeah. The garage. You just, when you're just saying that, like I said, talking to people, I learn so much, and I love it when they go through this because they'll say, "This is what made sense to me. This is what worked for me. This is what made meaning for me." And when here's the other thing too. It's like with the nature of sound. It's the conversations you start having. So you start having when we had our group doing that. Look at the conversations we had. It was not about and not that this was not significant trauma, but the trauma was not the focus of the conversation. We talked about the themes. We talked about, the notion of resilience. We used art. There were people who created songs around that and pictures and everything to really look at building this awareness within them. And that to me is some things I never really saw coming when I did this 15 years ago. But in doing it, seeing how people have taken it up and how they have found meaning and making sense of it for them. That's why I tell people all the time, too, when I work with people in Metahab, I never stage them. They get to read the stages and figure out where they're at, and I may work with them to see how to move from one stage to the next. There's also things that we worked with called facilitating conditions and characteristics. So, lists of behaviors, lists of characteristics that people who had done well utilized. And so, I would have you go through that and check off what you have. And I always love it because, especially, I worked for a long time with people at Salvation Army in the adult rehab center. And they would say, "Well, do you want me, don't you want me to check off what I don't have?" I go, "No, no, I don't want to focus on what you don't have. We're going to build on your existing strengths, what you understand is your strengths, and we're going to build on that." But the thing that also was very telling to me is when I'd work with people like that and they would check off the boxes, and I would have them do it every once in a while, a week later, 4 weeks later, whatever. They would go back and say, "Look I actually checked off more." And I would say, "I didn't teach you anything. You have now focused and become aware of what you have." Isn't that beautiful?
It
Isn't that
really
beautiful?
it really is because what you've done is give people the opportunity to have self confidence, to build on what they already have as their foundation. And really,
Mhm.
when it comes to observing the themes and not
Uh-huh.
focusing on the trauma, it prevents us
Mhm.
from relating.
Mhm.
And, not in a bad way, but you don't want to compare traumas and journeys, is what I'm really trying to get at. And that's what creates a lot of barriers because you
Yes.
think they don't understand what I've gone through. They don't understand. And that's a barrier because they don't need to understand. They just need
Yeah.
to respect and acknowledge you, right? And I feel like with Metahab, that really sets the environment for that because when we're sitting there talking about these observations, it allows us to relate because we're taking it in internally and we're not
Mhm.
exerting what we perceive outward.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that to me was so important because it really allowed us to communicate together and not compare and it's really, I feel like it's a downward slope when you start comparing traumas.
Oh,
And with your first conference, it was so eye opening for me because when you had one of the speakers talk about his traumatic event, and it was just to kind of paraphrase, he was playing basketball outside with his friends, and someone came up with a gun and pointed it at them, and he experienced a traumatic event because that could have
yeah.
been the end of his life, it could have been the end of his friend's life. And when we come from a situation where we've endured physical death threatening or life threatening circumstances, and it really humbles the experience because
Mhm.
we forget that levels of trauma are different for everybody. And I thought that was such an important topic because it doesn't need to be as bad as the worst, right? It doesn't need to be the worst experience for it to still be traumatic, to still be life altering, and that makes us really understand the the delicacy of life and the human experience. And that was one of the big takeaways that I took from the first conference is just how fragile life is and how different our perspectives are. And that's
Mhm.
beautiful. And it really, I don't want to make this sound bad, but when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that was it. That was my first thought was,
Mhm.
oh, like no one died. That was it.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
sat there and I was like, wait a second. That was still incredibly traumatic for that person. And I'm so happy for them that nothing happened. And,
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
just kind of made
Mhm.
me feel more connected to humanity and not detached in these barriers, these walls that we build up when we
Mhm.
endure incredibly difficult situations.
Mhm. And and I think that's the thing too that people get because we need to stop judging on so many levels. Like you said, that was, you know, that let's put it in perspective. He was a teenager, he was African American. He was in the, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff going around that where it could have gone in some really nasty bad ways. And so you think about having that kind of experience, when you fill in a little bit more of the story. But the other part of that too is, and I see this when I put more people together who go through these different experiences, that they stop judging, oh, that's bad, and just go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to hear you went through that. I'm so sorry you went through that. And that is sharing our humanity. And
Absolutely.
adversities and challenges and trauma can do that. So,
So yeah, I just
so
wanted to take this moment to ground us as we're coming to an end to our deep dive into Metahab and nature of
mhm.
sound. Just some, final thoughts do you have?
Well, I think, my final thoughts about this is just for me, having the opportunity to even talk to you about something like this, something that was so important to me, when I went through what I went through, to find a way up and out of that negative space was really important, and to have done the work and have people who see its value, not only from an academic perspective, but from a real world life perspective. That is so, that feeds me to hear what you got from it, to see what it just, it's so, it feeds me. So as we talk about this and move forward, just keep getting the word out and using other opportunities like collaborating with Nature of Sound, because we're both doing some really good, important work to, not, I wouldn't say help, but to utilize these experiences in a way that somebody can become very creative, very strong, and very purposeful about their life.
And it's such a privilege and honor to have you on here. And I'm so excited to have you on again in the future. I know just already we've passed an hour,
Wow.
and I just think we could continue talking, we continue delving into the deeper parts of this conversation. So that's just an opportunity for us to just connect again and bring in other specialists that we can
Oh, yeah,
collaborate and talk to when we get more into the behavioral health side of things, the maybe even
totally.
the genetics and just the whole process that allows us to create this post-traumatic growth. So
Oh,
just a
that's
final shout out for, just for our viewers to check out
beautiful.
metahab.com if you're interested in hearing more about what Dr. Joyce Mikal-Flynn is doing. And be sure to catch us again on March 6th, where we will have Safe Haven and Jesse Hill. But yeah, yeah, so that's where
So
we're
yeah, the
talking
people
about.
can, yeah. So I'm sorry, I cut in through there, but
Oh
yeah.
no, it's
So
fine.
again, you can go to Metahab, metahab.com, or also you can go to drjmf. So Dr. Joyce Mikal-Flynn, drjmf.com, and follow me on Instagram, dr.jmf. So, and then let's put that link up there. Make sure we get that link up there for that April 20th conference, because it's just going to be great. But you're going to be part of it. So we
I
need to
will
have
be.
that.
And I
All
really
right.
look forward to that.
Okay. Talk to you later. Bye bye.
Bye.